Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Modern Business Operations. Today, I have the pleasure of hosting Nina Bomberg, the Director of Global Indirect Procurement for dormakaba. Nina, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to connect. You lead indirect procurement, but you also coach and a frequent speaker. I know a lot of the topics I've seen are very aligned with what we like to talk about here in the podcast. But maybe a good place to start is just to get a little bit of background about you and your career.
Sure. So like many others, I stumbled into procurement. I think that is a very common path to get into it. And then you either love it or you hate it. I obviously loved it because 20 years later, I'm still around. I've done this in 20 different industries now, which is the beauty of indirect procurement, because frankly, every industry would tell you that they're very, very special. And then you ask them about what's special about their use of pencils and toilet paper, and you realize that the differences are not that big anymore.
That's funny. Well, the point you just made about like stumbling into like literally every time I talk to someone from procurement, that comes up. But like you said, you become more than just good with it. You also speak and help other companies with this. Is that right?
Indeed. I really think that there are enough mistakes out there for all of us to make our own. We don't have to copy those of others. And stealing with pride is definitely a motto that I would follow. So if somebody has something interesting to share, I think it's worthwhile to listen. And that's why I also share the experiences that I've made so that people can benefit from these things. And as a whole and as a profession, we can improve together.
So let's talk about this a little bit about improving. I think there's a lot of change in the last 20 years of this category, but honestly, in operations in general, what is your biggest takeaway right now? Are we in a uptrend or downtrend or stagnation? Where would you rate the well, specifically the procurement department or indirect procurement even?
I have to say, I think we are in a constant change. That is definitely something that I think is true. People always talk about procurement having a seat at the table, or getting a seat at the table. Personally, I think we always have a seat at the table. It's just that we sit on a folding chair. And when times are tough, it comes out and we get our seat. And when times are good, it goes back into the corner. And I think especially during those COVID years, we have had our seat at the table and we have had our voices heard. Also in indirect procurement, considering that PSA as well as logistics is usually part of the indirect procurement space, we have definitely had a 5 minutes of fame during that era.
So how do you keep that? Because you're right, like the being more strategic and being more impactful, focusing on more value driven. I, honestly, I think any department that's kind of their their high level goal, other than just hitting their whatever annual goals are, is like how do we become as as a department more strategic, more important, if you will. What happened? Like, where what happened at this moment where I love the folding chair example though. What happened with this moment where you know you getting the attention, you're realizing, okay, sort of like you see, I told you, if we're not focusing on this, this is gonna bite us back. But then the chair has been folded out again. Like, what should department do? What should procurement leaders do to make a case where they should not be folded? They should be a permanent chair.
I think one really important aspect that has got more attention now, and that attention has stuck, is anything around supplier and supply chain resilience. So people have understood how quickly that whole concept can collapse. And even after the COVID times, I mean, we just have it with, Houthi rebels or what have you not. At the moment, it seems like there's always something. The Panama Channel not having enough water, especially in all of that logistics space, is something where the indirect procurement really touches on overall material availability. And that is something where people have understood if we stop production, then that's a serious issue and that's a real problem. And that is where we have gotten more traction and more attention. The other part that I see in dormakaba, for example, we are getting more attention now because we are, for example, one of the, or actually the first department to have anything live revolving around AI, where we are really being seen as leaders and as innovators, which is also giving us more bandwidth as a whole.
So let's double click a little bit about that, because that's obviously a very interesting topic for a lot of people. Effective ways to leverage AI and so on. So where does maybe expand a little bit about that? From what perspective do you guys are being seen as a leader? Is that from your services you give, or the way you use AI internally?
Yes. Well, first of all, the fact that we use AI, because others have, let's say, the same idea, but they're not quite there yet. But we went live almost half a year ago now, where we're using it, for example, as an intake tool, where we're trying to make procurement processes easier by being able to put in a PR with natural language, which is something that really helps people, by being able to read quotes that people might already have and being able to break them down in a way that procurement can digest them as well. So we stop a lot of this typing back and forth. How many times have people had a PDF quote, which they then had to manually type into a PR system to be able to submit it? Well, these kinds of things have gone. We're trying to make the process easier for the internal customers because we really believe that as an internal service function, which indirect procurement is, at the end of the day, nothing we do delivers revenue. We have to make it as easy as possible for the ones who do deliver revenue to be able to do so, while at the same time adhering to procurement processes, which we have put in place for good reason. We work because we want good pricing, because we want compliant contracts and what have you not. But these things are absolutely our goals, not necessarily operations goals or whatever HR's goals. They are, of course, also dormakaba's goals as a whole, but not of the individual departments that we work with. So we have to make it as seemingly easy as possible for them while still making sure that we meet our targets.
And I think this in general becomes an increasingly, I don't know if common, but more accepted reality, that, the importance of streamlining, some of those things, not by shoving things through, enforcing change, but actually reducing change by aligning with a more kind of accepting or flexible, systems. And I personally obviously fully agree with how much of this new wave of technology around AI, specifically, large language models, help with that. What is the impact of those things, though? Like, when you think about the importance of it?
Well, I personally think the impact is huge. Especially in indirect procurement, at dormakaba we have 15,000 employees. That means around 15,000 people need something from indirect procurement at some point, sooner or later, because they'll be buying safety shoes or pencils or traveling or what have you not. So if we make each and every one of these interactions with indirect procurement 10 minutes quicker than they were before, the productivity gain is enormous. And this is something that can really keep us our seat at the table when we advocate for, listen, it's not necessarily our prime job to make sure that the pencil is 65 cents and not 75 cents. Yes, we do that too. But actually, it's making sure that everybody in the company can work as effectively as they have to, while still getting the things that they need. That is such a crucial aspect. At the same time, this now really has the chance to revolutionize how we do corporate software. We all have more than 100 apps on our phones easily. For none of them I have ever received any training. And if I haven't understood how this is supposed to operate by the second minute, I just delete it. I deinstall it. But with corporate software, I don't have that option to just go and deinstall everything I don't like. But there's actually no reason for any of these tools to be that complex that I need a 2-day training to be able to put in a purchase requisition.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about change management further. I know this is something you also pretty passionate about, anywhere from, the transformation or digital transformation, as you used to call it, or still some call it, which is pretty basic in my opinion. You take something from a paper to digital form, to what you just mentioned, and kind of like what I'm trying to attach to is the idea of, well, all those applications are there now, but if I need to train everyone of how to use them, or force again them to use it, although it is ineffective for them, then where did we actually unlock the gain of digitalization? So again, we are very aligned on on our way of thinking, but I'm curious, kind of like where do you see the almost the maturity curve of the industry, or the market, from people understanding, or getting into understanding it? Again, like I said, I do think this area gets more noise or more attention lately. I'm asking the receiving end of the attention, sort of like um, where do you think people are? Other
I think
indirect
that
procurement
I
departments.
think that depends very much on the company. Even less so the industry. People say it goes by industries. Personally, I think it goes more by company and its own maturity. I have joined a company 7 years ago where in the interview, no, it wasn't seven, either way. I joined them a while ago. Where in the interview on said, okay, so how big is your indirect spend? And they said around about 500 million, maybe 450, but probably not more than 650. That was a $2 billion company, and they did not know where a quarter of their revenue was going. So some companies just have the pure, abundant luxury of being able to afford that. While other companies, slightly depending on the industry, but more so on the company, have seen the potential of indirect procurement and what it can bring and what it can do and how much effect it can have. And I think that's where we really see how far people are at, because they are anywhere from there to a maverick spend of smaller than 1%, and non-touch PO quota of whatever, north of 80%, and anything in between, to be honest. So that is really where we see a very, very large bandwidth, which is also why I'm always a little hesitant when we, especially at conferences and when we discuss these things, and then some topics we have discussed for a while, and then everybody feels, yeah, okay, we're all on board with this now. Let's move on to the next thing. And actually, no, it's the top 3% that is on board with that now. The other 97% are still trying to figure out how to get started. I always get this discussion when we talked about a lot about RPAs when that topic came up. To me, that was before the last big thing. And everybody talked about RPAs and RPAs. And then at some point we said, so listen, if you want to use an RPA, your data quality has to be top notch. Where are you on data quality? And we realized some people have not moved on since the 60s. They still haven't figured out the basics. While now, the top percent is talking about the absolute, the cherry on the cake.
One thing I said on a panel a couple weeks ago, and they asked me, "Are you gonna what do you think about AI taking your job?" And my reaction was, "Well, you don't need to fear about AI taking your job. You need to fear about your neighbor using AI taking your job." And that really connects to me, to what you say here, because I agree with you. Like, a lot of times, some of the hype around those technologies is doing also disservice to, because it feels like fashion. But in fact, it's not fashion. Unlike fashion, like in clothing, where it is come and go, the next fashion might have resemblance or inspiration by the old fashion, but it's not built on it. I think you made a really, really important point that I don't think is talked enough about. Each one of those waves is built upon the old wave. Just like these digital transformation, quote unquote, what I'm saying is like very basic. It's very basic, but if you're still using paper, then you can't use any of the things we're talking about right now. And so you have to first digitalize it, but then you need to clean it. And like you said, like, make sure the data is managed in the right way. And then on top of that, you need to understand automation and where do you need to automate, where you still need people. And then on top of that, you need to, kind of align to that next layer. And the next layer after that, would obviously be built on that too. So I think that's a very interesting way to maybe create some urgency for some people, because I think they're like, okay, it's fine. Like, I'm okay in being in that late majority, group. Even maybe even early majority. I don't want to be an innovator. I don't want to be an early adopter. But the problem with this specific situation, again, unlike consumer goods, if you're so far behind, then that will be a catastrophic event for your company. Like, you'll be in a big problem, and we've seen that. We've seen companies that got stuck in like mainframe technology, and then all of a sudden, pulling the plug and moving to a place where you can enable some of the new technologies was incredibly painful, incredibly expensive, and really could have been avoided if you stay true to the time. You don't have to be, again, the first in, right? You don't have to be the first, but like, you can't be the last. You can't be like too late. So
Yes. And
anyway,
I think
that's
there are certain things that you can probably leapfrog if you haven't adopted them and you don't need to adopt them anymore. Like, nobody would now still go and buy a Discman if they wanted to play music. But indeed, if you didn't have access to digital music, that would be really, really hard. And I usually relate it to, it's a bit like learning a language. If everybody else has studied a language for a year and you start studying the language, your vocabulary and your grammar is not going to be where the rest is. And you will have to catch up on that in order to be able to keep up with the rest of the team. You might be able to skip whatever, future two, because it's not that used. And if somebody has learned it, okay, fine. And you will get by without it, but you will not get by without any of the grammar.
exactly. No, and that is actually a good example where I think most people think about leapfrogging technology like the Discman. But I think which has the right tone to it, but it's missing the point of the fundamentals, which the language example, I think, illustrated better, which is, again, there are things you can skip, but you cannot skip the fundamentals, because then, so like, and people, and I'm saying people, everyone, like, this is why markets exist. It's incredibly hard to predict which one of those waves is going to be fundamental wave versus not. It's easier obviously it's obvious in retrospective, but in hindsight, right? But as you go through it, you might have a strong opinion towards one thing or another, but you never know for sure, until it's done. And so,
No, and
so
it's
it's very
always the best. I mean, back in the
always the
days,
best.
I paid at least $300 for a mini disc, man. Boy, that was a bad investment.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Although, now just sidetracking for a second, but all those old VHS cassettes that my dad has, if he moved them back then to a CD, that would have been cheaper than if he's now trying to find someone to do it for him. Right. So like, so there's a lot of that too. And that's the point, I think. Part of the point, actually, if I do put it back, there is a cost for it to associate it. So even if you're not gonna be fully stuck in the sense of like you can't, but the catch up might be so expensive that, honestly, you're gonna lose your job, or or the company's gonna suffer a lot, or whatnot. So I think it's a good reminder to explain to people, like, you go to all those events or the conferences, you go through all this stuff. Uh, I think it's important to remind, going back all the way back to where we started this conversation with the seat on the table, is being strategic. Part of being strategic is understanding that you have to keep with the times, and push your organization, the one you're responsible for, forward. And it always means that it is the fight. You would have to fight some people, because they say, why? I don't think it's critical right now. Maybe we'll do it next year. Maybe we'll do it then the year after. And so I think that's a great advice.
Everything, it comes back to, simple things like the Eisenhower Matrix. We get stuck in urgent and then we miss important.
Mm-hmm. Very true. That's very true. Very true. So maybe going back to, you know, where we are right now, where do you think, if you have to guess, what would be the next few years? Is this, because like you said, you kind of mentioned a few examples, the hoodies, the global economy, the global, state of things. Obviously, COVID was sort of that black swan situation. Have we learned from it? Are people building ammunition from from like a political power within organization to kind of like build a better process there, build a better or people are pretty numb to it?
I think it depends a little bit. We have already seen some numbness again, where people have just accustomed, where as procurement, you say, listen, good example of port strikes that are happening in the US last few months and in Canada, where we said, hey, it's time to build inventory. We might be hit. And people are diverting back to, hey, it's not going to be that bad. But then we are in a place now where we can at least go back and say, listen, that's what you said last time. It didn't work out that way. So maybe we can find a better compromise on, what's the right inventory level versus how much do we want to pay for it? How cautious do we want to be? How much risk do we want to take? So that is something where we can have more informed discussions now and take more deliberate choices. Also as a company as a whole, where we together take the risk and then decide on, are we going to do this or not? Same goes for moving away from single sources. This is something that in certain industries was very big because, of course, it gives you the very best price. But we have also learned that 100% dependency on just one supplier is exactly that, 100% dependency on a single supplier. And something could always go wrong. You never know. Especially if it's in a different continent where then you are also relying on transport ways and so on. So that is something where I do see a certain learning curve, but I also see a numbness that coming back where you just accustomed to the new status quo.
And maybe just to finish that point, what about the other side of it? So if I look back in the last, 3, 4 years, starting at COVID, but like you mentioned, other things that also happened with the economy and others and the geopolitical, there's there's this sort of like sort of spotlight moment for procurement, but then there's also been a push from the CFO to the CEO to the board of directors to better handle, spend, better handle supply chain, better handle um relationships. Like, is that slowing down? Is that, or is that, was that enough to change perspective for a little bit longer, where that becomes just a general, because that example that you gave with that company that has, you know, anywhere between 400 to $650 million of spend, this is laughable, but it's so 19 or 2021, like this is the bubble speak. And I find it hard to believe that would be the case today. Of course, there's always exceptions, but like, on a balance. But then I don't know what will happen in 3 years and 4 years and 5 years. Is that it was enough to kind of change the current generation to at least, a decade of listening or like focused, or do you think it's such a fleeing, fire drill that people just would look at it as a fire drill versus like a really aha moment of, oh shoot, we need to look at those things.
I think it is more of a fire drill, but we are having them a lot more regularly now. I remember that, I want to say maybe 23 people, COVID was gradually fading out. And exactly these finance departments saying, we can go back to normal now. And then there was a ship diagonally in the Suez Canal. So we said, yeah, no, maybe not quite. And then that was resolved. And then, the next thing came in the Panama Channel. And then now it's the Suez Channel again. So I think we are taking these hits in just much shorter stints which is why I think it still feels like a fire drill, but it's a constant on and off. I've had a call actually last week where somebody asked me, Nina, so what's the latest on supply chain disruptions? I have the feeling, knock on wood, it's quiet for now. That was just after the Canada union strikes were resolved. And I said, I tend to agree, but then it's only Tuesday. Let's see what the rest of the week brings. So I think people are more alert and more attentive to reacting quicker to when it happens and to being more used to this exact fire drill because they've been through it a few times.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where I'm trying to get to, right? Is where, when do people move from, oh man, like there's so many fire drills, uh, I can't wait for it to go back to normal versus realizing this is the new normal. And that this new normal doesn't have to be that you have constant fire drills, but that you expect to have disruption in some way or another. It's only surprising if you don't expect it. But if you understand, like, if you understand that that's part of what happens, even if we separate for a second the supply chain and the indirect discussion, right? If you just understand that, hey, there's a big difference between 400 and 650, right? Like you can manage that better. Like that's something you can control better. It doesn't happen to you. You make an effort to change it, then it just changed the normal. Then the expectation changed, the annual goals changed, the job description when you hire a new person changed. You know what I mean? You just expect different things. Where are we in that cycle? Like from leadership expectation, that this is something that procurement teams, indirect procurement teams, even specifically, need to own, need to kind of like think through, and just expect that, there's going to be disruption in supply chain. There's going to be increase and decrease in spend. It happens all the time. We need to manage it better and so on. Versus only like, can you get better suppliers with better prices, which is what kind of like, quote unquote, used to be.
Yeah, and I think that one we have definitely evolved out of. Are we there as an entire function that we understand and always are on the lookout for any disruption way ahead of time? Not necessarily. On the other hand, you have fire drills so that when push comes to shove, muscle memory kicks in, automatisms kick in, and everybody knows what to do without having to think about each and every step of the way. And a bit that's where I think we have gone through a very steep learning curve, that when now somebody says port strikes, everybody knows the three steps that we follow without necessarily, consciously being on them, but just knowing, okay, we've been there, we've done this, let's follow the steps. Both.
Yep. Great. Awesome. Well, that's some great insights, and I think great advice along the way. I want to finish with, I always like to ask, on a personal level, what advice did you get maybe early in your career or during your career that you feel like is worth paying forward?
I've had one boss, and he always used to say, assume good intention, don't assume motive. So leaving the last 2% psychopaths aside, everybody comes to work to do a good job. And if they're not, they're usually either lacking skill or information, both of which can be changed. So if you don't, next time you're really frustrated about what that email that someone wrote or that task that they didn't do, maybe take a minute to look at it from their side and think about what they could have possibly been thinking when they were writing that email. It might make more sense than it does from your end.
I love it. Thank you so much. Nina, that was great. If anyone wants to continue to nerd with you on those things, is that LinkedIn, X?
Definitely. Yes, you can find me on LinkedIn. I think I've only seen my name once, so you will definitely be able to find me.
Very good. Awesome. Well, thank you for this conversation. That was awesome.
Thank you so much. This was great.